announcements. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a beautiful morning, and we have an interesting day ahead of us of corporate governance, 2 days actually. And I've been tasked to manage this forum on self-regulation. If I may just give a short little story. Let's assume, bayangkan, that we have 100 million right now here. Okay? The government, now musim election kan, dream, everything is happening. So let's just assume that something just drop 100 million here. And then they told us something. All you good people, all you nice people, I have left 100 million here, but you must all share and use it wisely. You must all share and use it wisely for the good of your company and the nation. Now, how are we going to divide and share that 100 million there? I suppose it's a combination of regulation and self-regulation. The topic that we are going to talk about today will be how are we going to self-regulate ourselves, if it's possible, to share that 100 million, to use that 100 million that is down here. So, if I may introduce the panels before us, I have 2 Tan Sris and 1 CFO. We have Tan Sri Dr. Lin, Tan Sri Dato Dr. Lim Si Yen, as was announced just now, Howard. His last thing is that he was the former Deputy Governor of Bank Negara Malaysia, a very senior position. He has been sitting on many important institutions. Tan Sri was also the chairman of Khazanah. Tan Sri was also the chairman of a bank as well in the past, and many other roles that he has played. And he's quite a public figure. He has columns, he writes, he's still very active. And then we also have Tan Sri Dato Sri Mukat Najmuddin, another very a name that we in the media we associate him with. Is the badge there is corporate governance. When we talk about corporate governance, his name pops out in our industry, my industry at least. Tan Sri, again, as you can see in your list, illustrious career, sits on many boards. Perhaps he can share some insights of what's going on in those companies today. Tan Sri is the president, as you all know, of the Federation of Public Listed Companies Berhad and Malaysian Institute of Corporate Governance. So he's involved there. And from the management side, today we will have the pleasure of at least having some insights from Faisal Mansoor. Faisal, he is a chartered accountant. He studied and had worked in Australia as well, and is now the CFO at Malaysia Airports Holdings Berhad, a company that is in the limelight. Maybe he will share with us some things about the company as well. And I'm sure you guys will have some queries and questions on that company, and I'm sure he'll be happy to share what's happening in the company. Without much ado, I would like to get the ball rolling. Maybe I can get, since Nancy Magan is here, maybe let's say, would you like to talk a little bit about, right now when we talk, our topic is basically about self-regulation. Corporate governance is something we've discussed many times before. Now, when it comes to self-regulation, what is the state of affairs in Malaysia currently? Maybe we can get a hold.
Well, to start with, corporate governance is all about accommodation of laws and self-regulation. The very foundation of good governance are the laws of this country. And we have a plethora of laws relating to governance, especially corporate governance. You look at the Companies Act, you look at the Securities Commission Act, you look at the Banking Act, you look at the Insurance Act, you look at the Cooperatives Act, you look at so many acts and ordinances and rules and regulations. We have this plethora of laws regulating us in the corporate as well as in the business sector. But 13 years ago, we came out with the Code on Corporate Governance. Now this code is about self-regulation. It's about us, putting the onus on us to behave properly, to behave in the right manner. especially when you make decisions at the board level. The onus really, the pressure, the burden is carried by the board of governance, board of directors. Not by, so much by management, but management must carry out the policies that are put in place by the board of directors, because the ultimate decision maker, as far as the law is concerned, are the board of directors. So really, it is a combination of both laws and self-regulation. But the very foundation, as I said just now, are the laws relating to governance. Now, the topic is indeed very interesting because it says that is self-regulation achievable? Well, let's put it this way. Self-regulation is a journey. It is not a destination. We have started our journey 13 years ago, wanting more self-regulation, more integrity in the processes, in the structures that we have in the corporate sector, and I hope also in the government sector. Maybe Tan Sri Lee can talk about that a bit, because we also need good governance in the government sector, in the public sector. Because without good governance, you see, corporate governance cannot exist in a vacuum. There has to be good public or national governance. The laws must be enforced. Sadly, we don't have a very good reputation when it comes to enforcement. Many years ago, CLSA, a survey company and also a consultancy company, did a survey on all the countries in Asia regarding their laws and enforcement. When it came to legal system of laws, we scored 95 out of 100. That means we are number one in Asia when it comes to system of laws. But when it came to enforcement, we were third last, below many of our neighbors. So that really incriminates us. So what is the point of having laws when you don't enforce it? You can see it every day. When I came from PJ to here just now, I can see the motorists, all of us, flouting the laws of the traffic laws, and littering and vandalism is rampant in all our municipalities and cities. So this is the big weakness. Enforcement is always easier said than done. And enforcement also is always after the fact. After the dastardly deed, the bad deed has been done. As I said to Abidjan just now, somebody kills you, and so we have to enforce the law, but you cannot come back to life. The deed has been done, the damage has been done. In other words, you want to close the gate only after the horses has bolted. That is enforcement, but still we have to put the fear, or what you call a deterrent factor. We must make sure that people are afraid of the law, respect the law, respect the rule of law, which is very fundamental. In a democratic society, there must be respect. And in fact, love for the law as well, love for the rule of law. We need that. That's the very basis of our existence as a nation, as a people as well. And especially so in the multiracial, multi-religious, multicultural milieu that we live in. We need to respect the rule of law. So I think that's, for starters, Bajan, I think that's enough.
Thank you. Thank you, Tan Sri. And Tan Sri, Dr. Lim, maybe you can kick off. When we talk about self-regulating, so there is self-regulating on one side, and there is governance on the other side, self-governance. There are laws and how we react to it. What is your take on this? I mean, are you for regulation, self-governance? Can you maybe take us on that path?
Can I use? Ladies and gentlemen, I've been a regulator for the greater part of my professional life, but I've retired from it for 20 years. I'm on the other side of the fence now. I sit on many publicly listed companies. I consult with a lot of international companies. So I have seen both sides. So let me start by stating my position. I'm strongly against over-regulation. I'm against complete self-governance. I'm for self-governance within the confines of a well-thought-out framework. A framework where board of directors must be given the responsibility to act responsibly within the reform system that we know of today of corporate governance. Whereon the board will rely on the audit committee, the nomination committee, and the remuneration committee, and including the risk committee if needed, to oversee the effectiveness of implementation of its role in a very proactive manner. That's what I believe in. So let me state right at the outset, unlike my friend Tan Sri Maga, I think there's over-regulation. There's definitely over-regulation in this country. Both SC and Bursa shouldn't be telling the board of directors specifically what to do. Only what is expected, and the broad ground rules circumscribing the framework within which the board of directors would operate. But we are now told that we need more rules to remain relevant. The Securities Commission Corporate Blueprint 2011 contains 35 new recommendations, and if I may quote, to move from the normative tendency which regards corporate governance as a matter of compliance with the rules to one that is more fittingly captures the essence of good governance. The chairman, the former chairman of the SC, which put out that report, emphasized that the blueprint outlines strategic initiatives aimed at strengthening self and market discipline. Yet, its recommendation introduces more rules in the name of intending to reinforce self and market disciplinary mechanisms. What they are telling us is you need more rules in order to regulate yourself. It's quite clear that what we need is time to build corporate culture. Which is also strange that the SC doesn't practice what it preaches. Away from normative rules to greater reliance on self-regulation within a well-thought-out, recalibrated overall framework. What we all forget is that the essence of good governance, corporate governance, involves a state of mind. Human behavior is unpredictable. No one size fits all. You just can't legislate good morals. Frankly, we don't need more rules. As I said, we just need more time to build our own corporate culture. So if I may come down to basics, the Bursa and SC tend to run our corporate lives. In fact, it hams the boards, they ham us in. For example, to be a REIT manager, you know what a REIT manager is? REIT. The form filling is atrociously painful. I've been through the process because I'm chairman of IGB REITs. And it makes no difference as far as the form filling is concerned between a regular fund manager and a REIT manager. For example, they want to know all the stocks and shares I've bought in the past 1 year. Why? I'm only managing a real estate trust. But he wants to know. I don't see the logic in it. More importantly, I don't see, in fact, I worry what they do with the information they get from me. So one size doesn't fit all. There are many other examples of why the SC runs our lives. For example, why is the 9-year rule for independent directors even necessary? Why dictate and set 5 as the number of, by Bursa, as the number of public companies you can become independent director? Why a quota for female directors? And this is what I mean. They run our lives. The new rules require, and what they forget is, the new rules require the board of directors to report annually its effectiveness and independence of the directors. And the nomination committee and the remuneration committee will do this, to help the board to do this. And they have access to expertise if they ever need it. So we don't need more rules to tell us what to do. Good board of directors and its nomination committee and remuneration committee should know what to do and how to do it. What is more important, by the time the rules came out, circumstances are beginning to change. The rules are static. For example, there is today an emergence of professional independent directors. That makes a difference. Second, the increasing amount of takeovers and mergers change the landscape of publicly listed companies' management. When somebody takes over a company, it changes management. So even if you have been on the board for 10 years and you are asked to remain, you are dealing with a new, the rationale for 9 years don't apply anymore. But the rules don't take all these things into account. This is my point. Let me give you an example. I sit on the board of Straits Trading in Singapore for 16 years. Then the company was taken over by a completely new management. In fact, by a team of ladies. I was asked to remain. As far as Singapore rules are concerned, I start from day 1. But our rules in Malaysia don't take that into account. You see, they're not dynamic. And this is what I mean. One rule doesn't fit all. Let me talk a bit about independent directors. That's it.
Before we go to that one, can we just hear a little bit on Faisal and then I'll come back to you?
Okay.
Yeah. All right?
I just wanted to paint for you the broad picture
Yes.
of why there are too many rules in our lives. Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Why don't you carry on? Huh? Okay, yes.
Let us finish without breaking the thread of thought. Independent directors. I think those of you who know me, I think I've written very extensively about independent directors. But even the SC says independence is inherently situational and is more than anything a state of mind. So ultimately, the qualitative evaluation is made by the collective board. But although this role is given to the boards, they want you to go to AGM. We debated this long and hard in Singapore. In the end, the new governance rules changed, and they gave the responsibility to the board of directors, which is correct. The board of directors know best. But then the argument is everybody has 9-year rule in UK, in Australia and all that. But this is the trouble. This is the trouble. Groupthink is dangerous. Because they do it in England, therefore we must do it. Why? There is no empirical evidence, and the SC report says so, that this is damaging the way board of directors run companies. After all, according to the SC, only 37% of the companies have indies. I mean independent directors, I call them indies, whose tenure exceeds 9 years, only 37%. So, what it fails to consider, I think, is our short history of corporate governance evolution, the imperatives of our Asian culture, the dominance of family-owned businesses, our closely knit corporate community, the company's business cycle, the supply and demand of experienced independent directors, and the increasing turnover of top management staff. In the end, I think the rule is too mechanical, too arbitrary. It just draws a line on the sand. And I want to repeat, although it said so in the governance book, ultimately it is the collective board that has to decide. But yet, the rules don't allow them to finally make the decision. And that's the problem with the 9-year rule. As I said, going to a general meeting to approve independent directors who have served more than 9 years is a bad idea. Why? An independent director, even if you have served more than 9 years, have to pass through the nomination committee. And the new governance rules emphasize the importance and role of the nomination committee. And yet, after recommending it, you still have to go to shareholders. Especially, none of the companies that I sit on can pass, or that of this recommendation, can pass the nomination committee without the support of the majority shareholder. But once you have the backing of the majority shareholder, why go to AGM? We forget there are two types of directors today. Professional, full-time directors, and part-time directors. But we lump them together. We don't make any difference between them. One size fits all. That's bad. So, I think there are many, many good reasons why the 9-year rule is, in my view, redundant. And then multiple directorships. I can't understand the logic. The Bursar's law write-up is very simple. very small number of people hold more than 5 directorships. Therefore, it was a fight. Where's the logic? Where's the logic? Doesn't make sense at all. If only very few people are involved, why have a rule? You don't need a rule. If it ain't broke, why fix it? Women directors. In my view, this idea of fixing a quota is discriminatory and a bad policy. In fact, I think it's an insult to women with capital. I understand. I do understand why they did it. Men today dominate boards, and they tend to be sexist. Talented executives are monitored, are mentored by men, preferring males for fear of being misunderstood. Globalization demands mobility which disrupt families. Here again, I think there are no shortcuts. Companies need to start by helping more women gain the right experience up the ladder and balance their family lives with the demands of the workplace. This is a slower process, but it is likely to be more meaningful, and most important, it upholds the dignity of women. Finally, my comments on continuing education. There's no question. We need continuing education. Most of us should be learning all the time. But what I worry is, and this has been the past experience, SC and Bursar wants to get into the business. That's a bad idea. That's an extremely bad idea. SC and rules should not be involved in providing them. They should instead stress quality and international exposure. Important to get the best and the brightest on board, here and abroad, to teach. In practice, the competition to bring in the best teachers and teaching must be real, not contrived or corrupted by vested interests. What SC and Bursar can do is to incentivize. That is to say, those who attend approved courses, and this should be given freely, should get income tax reductions. So it's a win-win for all. Otherwise, forget it. Directors today are smart and intellectually curious. Need to get them the best there is to make it worth their while to attend. Otherwise, compulsory attendance at training courses becomes a chore. That's worse than not attending the courses at all. Thank you very much. So, one final word about future of, since we have been asked to talk about future of regulation. My take is very simple. The SC and Bursar must practice what they preach. If you think self-governance is good, is a good objective, all you need to do is to set up the framework within which they play. It's like football. And then, like my good friend just said, if they break the ground rules, go after them. And go after them as though there's no tomorrow, not half-heartedly. In the meantime, I think the corporate community needs time to build corporate culture. Give them a chance to build a corporate culture. Thank you.
That's right. Corporate culture, over-regulation, trying to legislate morals, rules are static, circumstances are changing, groupthink. Tan Sri had put so beautifully so many points, and that was we were sitting in an MBA class. That was a very good MBA class. Let's give Tan Sri another round of applause. Thank you, Tan Sri. Tan Sri had actually written out these notes specifically for this session. These are fresh notes that are coming out, and we are the first to hear them out. Thank you, Tan Sri. And now let's.
Yeah, I've asked that this be made available to whoever wants.
Okay, so Tan Sri, it will be made available to whoever wants it. And now now that we've heard from this perspective, let's go the other side of the coin, which is the management. And we're fortunate to have Faisal here from MAHB, and maybe he would like to share with us something on what he thinks about corporate governance and self-regulation. Faisal?
Assalamualaikum and good morning. Well, to be honest with you, as a company, we don't really question what are the regulations, governance and so on. And we, on our part, I think when the codes come out and certain regulations come out, I believe the relevant parties would have done extensive studies and analysis on best practices out there. Because I think overall, if you think where Malaysia stands in terms of governance rankings, where we probably overall score in the 50s or 60s. Whereas you look at the more developed nations, they're probably up in the 80s level. So to some extent, to a long extent, there's still a long way to go for us. Now, so what I mean is we don't question it. And in a way, we're probably one of those companies that probably tick the box. We meet the regulatory requirements, we meet the what the code says that we meet. And I think most companies do that as well. You use that as a guideline on what you should practice as a company. And bottom line is, I think our board and so on, day and day, we think about what it means to be a good corporate citizen. And as a good corporate citizen, you have responsibilities to various stakeholders. Of course, here when you talk about corporate governance, you're referring to the concerns that investors have in your company. Okay, and you got to address those concerns. Now, I'll put on my investor relations cap a bit and do a bit of marketing for Malaysia Airports. We are a company that has come a long way since the start of the GLC transformation days, and we went from a company that was that had a profit margin of less than 10% to a net profit margin that has doubled to almost 20%. Our return on equity has gone tripled or quadrupled from just 2-3% 10 years ago to now in double digits. So we've accomplished a lot of things, and this has translated ultimately to our share price going up, quadruple from $1.50 to over $6. We're now a AAA company. In terms of foreign rating, Moody's and so on rank us almost at sovereign level to the government. So we've come a long way, and Khazanah initially owned us about 70%, and now they don't even control Malaysia Airports. They're down to over just about 40% in Malaysia Airports. So, and the way we see it, 10 years ago, we still met all these requirements. We still met all the regulations or regulatory requirements that was imposed on listed companies. We still adhered to a lot of these corporate governance issues back then, 10 years ago. And maybe the crisis in the late 90s required us to enhance our corporate governance practices. And I think we've gone beyond that. In our case, I think we've gone beyond what the regulatory requirements require of us to do, in terms of what the code requires us to do. There's no question in our case, or in terms of our investor concerns, there's no question about whether our board is independent. our composition of the board, the related party transactions within the company. There's no question of that anymore. I mean, you guys could probably testify to this. When you hear about Malaysia airports, the common questions that you hear now is KLIA 2 going to be completed on time? Is it going to be within 4 billion? It's now more about how we behave as a company. So the regulations, the codes and so on is almost like a given for us, and we're beyond that. Okay. So when our investors talk to us, and I'm referring to us as a GLC, and of course all GLCs probably face the same challenges as well. Because there's the word government there, okay? And therefore, when we talk to investors, one of their biggest concerns, of course, is apart from all these other issues, is your government practice good governance, right? So obviously, our role in IR is also about selling the government. So if the government doesn't practice good governance, forget about companies, individual companies practicing good governance. So it's good to see that at SC level, government level, or Bursa level, or whatever, they are giving a good indication to investors that we are a safe country to invest in, because they look at the company first before they look at you. Because I mean, there are hundreds of Bursa listed companies. How do they make a decision on to choose you? So in our case, we looked at a lot of how do you. So we subscribe to this corporate governance index, and before the MSWG rankings and so on. And back in 2006, we were number 40 in terms of that ranking, and then we came down to number 14, and then subsequently number 7. And now with the CG index coming out, we are consistently in the top, what we call I distinction companies, A-rated companies, A+ rated companies. So, when our investors ask us questions, when they have concerns, I'll be honest, their concern sometimes is because your government and they've got members on your board, could there be a risk whereby these government directors could act in the best interest of the public rather than in the best interest of shareholders? I'll be frank, these are the issues that we contend with. So we try to address these issues. So in our case, being Malaysia Airports, we have an operating agreement to run airports with the government. We address these issues in that concession agreement, in that operating agreement. For example, I'll be frank, in our operating agreement, it clearly stipulates that if there is an intervention by the government, just like in the cases with toll charges and so on, there would be compensation elements spelled out in the agreement. So you address investor concerns in that manner. So it's no longer about, is your board independent? It's no longer about, do you have audit committees or risk management committees and so on. So it's gone beyond that, and that's what we try to practice as well. Again, beyond that is addressing everyone's concern, including the public's concern. And that's what I mean right now. If you look at whenever you have questions about Malaysia airports, it's not a question about all these governance. It's a question about, again, are you going to complete the airport on time? So it's about how we behave, and because a lot of these other issues, it's almost like a given to us. Yeah, when we speak to our investors, they know already that we are a company that practices good governance. And therefore they want to see our behavior, whether our behavior reflects that. Because you can say you have a third independent directors and you have a non-executive chairman. You can say that your independent board members are less than 9 years. But if you don't practice it, it means nothing. And therefore, and when you think about it, some of these governance issues, you don't, it's the SC blueprint, for example, it says that you got to be less than 9 years. In our case, so to a large extent, the blueprint allows the PLCs to govern themselves, because although it says you got to be limited to 9 years. To be honest, we've got situations whereby a couple of our independent board members would go beyond the 9 years. It allows you to also justify why you need beyond the 9 years. And in our case, we have. And we address that at with the shareholders and so on. So, but I think when from an investor perspective, I think there is still the concern when they want to invest in Malaysia and in a particular company, they would like to know that within the country there are proper regulations and so on that would ensure the companies act accordingly. Because to a large extent, I agree with what Tan Sri Lin was saying, that you can't fully regulate or you can't completely allow self-regulation, because the truth of the matter is, I mean, if you allow the board to decide on whether they are independent or not without any proper framework, they'll stretch the boundaries on what is defined as independence. They'll stretch the boundaries on what is related party or not related party. So, so within a particular framework, I agree completely with Tan Sri Lin, and the regulations. Again, if you need to take enforcement on them, you have to have regulations. So definitely, I agree with my two panelists, Tan Sri's, and but on our side, again, we are governed by being a good corporate citizen, where we address investors, other stakeholders, the public, and so on.
Thank you. Faisal has given us an insight from a company. We heard from him how they manage things from the other side. I think I have one question after this. I'll come back to how they manage it at their end. I'm sure you have some queries as well. But let me get back to Tan Sri Mugat. Are we overregulated? Tan Sri, Dr. Lin, do you think so?
I tend to agree with Tan Sri Lin. I think we are over-regulated. I think we must allow the corporate culture to develop. It's early days yet. I mean, we had our code of corporate governance in place in the year 2000, and it's a long journey. You know, it's and sometimes the goalposts will be shifted as well as development take place, as minds change, you know, thinking change. So it's a journey. It's not a destination. Therefore, you know, let me put up there a quotation from this guru of self-governance, Sean Turnbull. Can you put it up, please? Quickly. Just food for thought. Sorry about the delay. The first one. It's the last one.
If you just bear with us, a little technical glitch. While we're sorting this out, last night I was to put me to bed. So I was a little nervous. I'm going to talk about corporate governance, and the guys are going to attend are directors and people running companies, and how much do I really know about corporate governance? How do I go to bed? And I decided, okay, I went to YouTube and I started looking for ceramahs, and I picked up there was one ceramah by Dato Sri Anwar, you know. So he was giving a ceramah somewhere in Batu Pahat somewhere, you know. And then after that, I did, okay, now I must balance it up. Then I took one of the UMNO ceramahs, you know. And one thing that I noticed, I mean, my analysis is, I'm not sure about the corporate governance that is going on in whatever they are saying. I think both sides are making a lot of promises, you know, and I think we'll have to really pen them later after these elections.
I think it's not going to work somehow. Let me read what Sean Turnbull, he's a guru of self-governance. He said, the cost and role of government would be radically reduced, while regulation would become far more efficient and effective through this approach to self-governance. Yeah? It is an approach where the role of government is reduced to that of embedding into the institutions of society the DNA of self-governance as found in all living things to sustain their existence. So as you can see, even animals have got self-governance, you know. You look at lions, they've got their own hierarchy. You see hyenas, the same thing. You see elephants as well, you know, it's a matriarchal society. The head of the herd is always a female. So we must have self-governance as opposed to regulation. Regulation, there's so many flaws in enforcement of regulations. It is also very expensive. And also there are integrity issues that's involved, you know, and perception issues as well. Sometimes people say, oh, it's all, you know, selective prosecution. You can never do it right. It's always difficult. And also the sentencing sometimes, you know, the sanctions and the sentencing that's being done by the judges are also have become very controversial as well. Because it's not consistent, it's not the same for all judges. So, yeah. So as you can see, that's Sean Turnbull. Next. Let's go to what Confucius have to say, this old sage. This old sage, he lived 2,500 years ago, but he's still relevant. Talking about governance again. What does it need? It needs good leadership. It's all about leadership, actually. If you govern the people legalistically and control them by punishment, they will avoid crime. Of course they will, but have no personal sense of shame. If you govern them by means of virtue and control them with propriety, they will gain their own sense of shame. Correct themselves. They will do for the time being. Think about it. What you call executive directors, or those people who are fully employed by the company, and independent directors who there's no distinction. Under the law, you are equally responsible. Irrespective as to what happened, you are responsible. And you can see for yourself, in the case of Transmile, 2 independent directors were sent to jail for mistakes or fraud that was done in the accounts. They were members of the audit committee, and they were sent to jail. And more, the burden and huge responsibilities are put upon the shoulders of all directors, irrespective of whether executive directors or independent directors. So there's no distinction. We are all responsible. That's why the leadership in the chairmanship, for instance, of every company is very important. You must set the tone. The tone must be set from the top, and you must make sure that structures and the processes of good governance are in place. It will help. I mean, you know, as I said to Tan Sri just now, the proof is always, the proof in the pudding is always in the eating. The trouble with us here in Malaysia is that we love the form, substance, nada. Or very little in terms of substance, but we love form. We love it. Yeah.
Thank you. Tan Sri, what about you? You raised the issue just now.
Listen, I think Makan is right. The responsibilities doesn't change, but the behavior and commitment of professional directors and non-professional directors are not the same. For example, if you are a professional, hello? Yeah. If you are a professional director, you have more time. And this is one of the rules or the guidelines of the SC, that if you are appointed director, you must spend more time. Right? A professional director has all the time in the world. But if you have a regular job and you sit on the board, your time is limited. So the commitment of time is different. Secondly, and more importantly, professional managers or professional directors look at this as a profession. You know, they take things very seriously. What people forget is that whether you are independent or not, it doesn't matter once you're on the board, because the Companies Act is very clear. You always act in the best interest of the company. Even if, let's say, Khazanah appoints you as director, you cannot listen to the directive of Khazanah. Your responsibility is defined by the Companies Act. That's why this question of whether you listen to whoever appointed you or not is irrelevant. If you understand the Companies Act. And similarly, people say, oh, you must take into account the interests of the minorities. No. Your interest is the best interest of the company. That's what you do all the time. And that people forget. And so, as I said, there's a big difference between this emerging professional class of independent directors and people who are appointed there, who are part-time, on a part-time basis. And their behavior and the way they go about their business is different. I can tell you this, I've been in the corporate sector for the last 20 years. As an independent director, it takes you 4 to 5, even 6 years. First, to understand today's companies. Today's companies are big. Many of the companies I see there have 200 over subsidiaries. All sorts of businesses. But more importantly, many of them are family owned. And it takes you a while to get to know the agenda of the majority shareholder. So that's why 9 years is nothing. By the time you get to know the company, by the time you go to a round, especially new companies, to raise money, you're already 7 years on the company. So that's why I said, but putting a limit of time is completely irrelevant. Like my friend says, you know, the form, not the content. The content is the state of mind. That's critical. And the mind is a funny piece of work. You know, it's unpredictable. It can be very professional. It can be trained. And so, in the end, the role of the nomination committee becomes critical. If you take all the forms that companies have to assess the performance of directors, of the board, of each director against peer, if you take that seriously, that's a lot of work. And if you do it right, you don't need this 9-year rule. You don't need this 5 companies. They're all irrelevant.
And Faisal, can you, well, I don't know if this is a fair question, but how do the independent directors at your company, do they add value to the company? And what value do they bring to the company?
You know, that's a very good point. I mean, because even, especially when, as Tan Sri said, if you have a family-owned company, or for them at a government company where the government owns a substantial, is the substantial shareholder, you would question that tendency whereby in deciding on a particular independent director, you question whether the director is really independent, especially when the major shareholder is making that decision ultimately in approving the independent director. But I mean, you can see it's not just Malaysia Airports, and if you look at other GLCs as well, as part of the whole GLC transformation and so on, there are very clear guidelines on what constitutes independence, having them to report their position and their independence position and so on. So in our case, we have, as a matter of fact, we meet the requirements, the 3 out of 10 board members that we have. One of the requirements that we don't meet is actually if you are like a government company, the chairman should be independent. Okay, so in our case, our chairman is also appointed by the government. So thereby, when this code comes out, we take the time to explain to our shareholders, and we have a justification there on why, even though the code says so, we have such a situation whereby our chairman is not independent. So we have the ability to explain that. Same thing as I said just now with regards to independent directors, whereby we have 2 independent directors who are in the 9th year, okay, and we are recommending for them to stay on for at least another year. And so it allows you to do that. Of course, you then provide justification to the shareholders. So in our case, we're saying that the reason we want them to be extended to another year is because we are in the midst of doing a major project. So like Tan Sri said, you know, it takes time for you to be very familiar with the company, and investors want directors who are familiar with the company. So in our case, because we are in the midst of completing a major project, the need for continuity and so on is very relevant. So we've got 2 that is touching that 9 years, or going beyond that 9 years. But we've got 1 that is relatively new to the company, just a few years. So we have a nice mix. And again, we take the time to explain that in a way we do see some merit in our case, okay? So again, not one size fits all, but in our case, we do see the merit sometimes why you shouldn't go beyond that 9 years. But the other thing that was interesting is the fact that when you mentioned about culture or that leadership, and as a company, that consistency, that continuity is something that that's where we are moving towards now. How do we ensure the sustainability of this corporate governance going forward? Because the management change, leadership changes, and so on. And we are actually in the stage whereby we are trying to develop that culture, which Bush Tan Sri talked about, of how do you ensure the sustainability or the continuity of that corporate governance going forward. And that is, you're right, that is a very, very difficult process. And but we have had a good history and track record of that governance, which we believe can be pushed forward. Again, 5 years ago, we had frankly zero analyst coverage. Not a single research house covered us. Now we have almost 20 analysts or research houses covering us, and half of them are foreign. We had only 1% foreign investor base 5 years ago. Now we have 15% foreign investor base. So this track record is something that we would like to see continue, and it's very critical that that culture is developed to ensure that this governance becomes something that you breathe every day, and which we have done for the last few years.
Thank you. We're going to open the floor in about 5 to 7 minutes, so if you have questions, get them ready. maybe we can also have some views maybe from the ladies. Tan Sri said that having a quota for the women is an insult to the women. I see a lot of women folk here. Maybe you can, I know women here, but you can speak from the floor and give us your opinion. Do you think it's an insult? Or do you think that's the way to go? Give it to you. I'll come back to the floor in a while. I would like to ask Tan Sri Megat one question. He's talking about how do you handle pressures from big owners? And you see the trade winds. How do you manage what is good for the company and what your major shareholder, who's a well-known person, want? How do you juggle this?
Well, to be fair to Tan Sri Mokhtar, he doesn't micromanage, that's for sure. The daily operations, he doesn't get involved. What he gets involved is normally when there are corporate deals to be made, which is quite fair because he after all, he owns about 70% of the company, and if he wants to do corporate deals, then it is his prerogative, you see. But other than that, he doesn't interfere with the day-to-day running of the company in terms of employment, hire and fire, stuff like that. Is the board that's responsible. So there are many companies like that owned by a dominant shareholder. You can see the YTL, Genting's, Jaya, so many companies that are totally dominated by a personality. Another Krishna's company. I mean, there's nothing wrong with mentioning their names because they are our icons, our corporate icons. They are one of the 10 richest, wealthiest people in Malaysia, and they have done well. Not so much because they micromanage. Another Krishna doesn't micromanage. Genting's as well. Pay doesn't micromanage right down to the very because it's too big to micromanage. The same thing with Mokhtar. His empire is huge. He cannot have the time. In no way, it's impossible for him to have the time to micromanage. So that's the way it is. Thank you.
Big businessmen normally will have your henchmen, guys who come to your corporate and he park himself there and say, okay, this is what the boss wants. Do you as a director, as a chairman, are you under pressure? Do you feel that, he's such a big name in the corporate field.
No, in most cases, being chairman, like trade winds. Tan Sri Mokhtar is an old friend. I've known him for the last 40 years, so it's not a problem. He doesn't pressure me, and he is a very fair person. He allows a lot of leeway for me as a chairman of the board to govern the company.
And Tan Sri, how do you compare directors' behavior and director selection in Singapore and Malaysia? You have experience on both sides of the divide here. How do you see them? Is there any difference?
The main difference is, Singapore has become a technical machine. The director, most of the professional directors reflect that. Look at the rules, apply the rules. Everything is in order. Malaysia, we are more relaxed. Doesn't mean that we are no better. In fact, ours, I think, is a much more relaxed atmosphere, right? There's flexibility in what we do, which is needed because no one size fits all. So it's a different culture on both sides. That's why I said it is important that the regulators give companies enough room to develop their own company. A family-controlled company behaves very differently from, let's say, a company that is driven by minority. A government company behaves differently. Right? The CSR is stronger in certain parts of things. But on independence, I love one quote from the person. And I hope you'll not take it. In order to determine independence, you have to make a statutory declaration. Simple. And say that I am. You have to be honest. That's a fantastic way of interpreting the human condition, human act. Give it to the person, declare statutory that way. That is, it's a fantastic way of solving.
Can I add a bit about Singapore, since you asked about Singapore? I studied law in Singapore, and it's the red dot, as we affectionately call that little island. I think Singapore is regulation driven. I think it is a prime example of an enforcement culture, because they have, I hear that, they have got policemen behind every tree. and of course they have this national service as well, where all youngsters, 18 years old, are put into national service. They're brainwashed, and they will even tell on their parents after that. They become the ears, the eyes and the ears of the government. So they've got everything under control. I mean, of course, now there is a groundswell of opinion against that kind of strict control over the whole island. And of course, now with Lee Kuan Yew almost out of the way, he's become very old now, and the son is in place. I think things are much more relaxed now. They are seeing, they're learning from us, we all relax again, relax again. Rather than all the time driving, banging people down, hammering people all the time. I think that those days are over. That's the red dot. Thank you.
Okay. Our topic is self-regulation in corporate governance achievable. We've been having some. I'll come back to the panelists again. I would like to open to the floor now. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, please. I think there are mics that will be handed. Just please, if you can, your name and your organization.
Good morning. Okay, sorry. Panel chairman and distinguished athletes. Just one question you might make. I hope it's relates this morning. I hope it's not too early to ask. The word that Tansi used was plethora. In addition to plethora of regulations and it's like having ice cream, and other regulations and bylaws, and we have this wonderful thing called guidelines, which are akin to the law itself. We also have a plethora of regulators, and this is where the directors have to be mindful. We have the Communist Commission, the Central Bank, Rules of Malaysia, of course, and the Securities Commission. So this is one thing that the management and independents have to be mindful of, because again, there's a plethora of regulators as well. I know one size doesn't fit all. I know in Singapore we have mass. So what does the distinguished analysts think of this? There's this plethora of regulators that we have in Malaysia in order to enforce, among other things, good corporate governance. Thank you.
Okay, too many regulators in the act. Anybody? You're a regulator? Or you were?
The problem arising from when you have too many regulators, they don't talk to each other. That's a problem. So you get rules and regulations that overlap, and you need interpretation rules. Who finally is in charge, so to speak, in implementing interpretation? We get this very often, and that's a problem for companies that have to comply with rules and regulations. So they should talk more often, and more importantly, the terms of reference overlap as well. And so you have, in fact, a lot of our problems dealing with regulations is, as he says this, Bursa says that, Bank Negara says that, and other things say, and you get confused. And this is one thing in Singapore, it doesn't happen very rarely. Singapore, the coordination is done. They are easy to do because they are a small place, yeah. But here, it's a problem. Even, let me put it this way. Like my friend Bhagat just said, We love form over substance. We announce things when we are not ready. You know? And this is one of our big problems. I'll give you an example. Secondary listing, right? I sit on companies in Singapore who wanted to list here, and companies here wanted to list in Singapore. The real question is, when you have two authorities involved in dual listing, when there's a conflict of laws, which law prevails? In one of our cases where we have a Singapore listed company, we wanted to list in Malaysia, we spent a lot of money and time on this, and finally we had to abandon it because the Malaysian laws and Singapore laws conflict. In a case like that, you would imagine that the laws of the primary listing would prevail. But in Malaysia, we say no, our law is our law. Doesn't matter in the secondary listing, we prevail over Singapore. We can't, because we are a Singapore listed company. So we abandon it. So you see, this comes to a front. I mean, it's actual case where the laws conflict. And what do you do? Because that's why I say, we are not ready. If you are ready, you would have sorted this out. Like Bank Negara doesn't have that problem. Because if it is a Singapore bank, then they say to Singapore, the Singapore authority and the Singapore bank is in charge. They have the final say. If it's a Malaysian bank operating in Singapore, Malaysia is in charge. You see, it all needs to be worked out, but not in, or between the Securities Commission and the authorities of both sides, in the case of secondary listing and private listing.
Faisal, would you like to add anything from company perspective, management perspective?
Yeah, the thing is, I had a very interesting experience in early part of my career being an investment banker and doing IPOs and so on. And I agree completely that it's such a horrendous exercise when you have to come up with a prospectus. You know, is this met every single requirement and so on. And then subsequently, having worked in Australia and trying to do an IPO. And I can tell you the process of doing an IPO in Australia is just beautiful. You know, when the prospectus is pretty much, well, a prospectus is really a sale document. So a prospectus in Australia is beautifully done, like a real sale document in trying to get investors. So, and when I compare the two, of course, definitely the future for us is definitely towards less regulation and so on. So from that angle, yeah, you can definitely appreciate how you know, the more developed markets, the way they have self-regulated themselves, and yeah, from that angle, definitely, I think, you know, you would want to see us heading in that manner. So again, when I consider again. At the end of the day, if you do not produce your prospectus accordingly that can attract investors, no one's going to invest in you. So, and that's ultimately our, you know, the drive of PLC.
Right. Thanks. Interesting thought. In fact, if you check out the Malaysian Reserve today, we have an article about the central bank. We actually read an article today on the FSAP assessment that was done for the nation, and we highlighted where what was surprising is we found that Bank Negara actually ranks somewhere in the middle. That was surprising to us, and this evening actually we're having an appointment with the governor. Probably we will post that question to her. Any more questions? Any questions? Comments? Yes, please. Okay, the gentleman, then we have one there.
All right, my name is Rosman. I'm in Raya. I had an opportunity once, about 6 years ago, working with the Dr. ACGA, the Colombian Capital. certainly I've learned a little bit even a year steep with you, Three. I think corporate governance is a great subject to debate, and my professional view, Malaysia is still a long way to go. I'm intrigued by the quote that's really about Confucius in the leadership example. The issue, in my view, with corporate governance is around even the selection of the board members themselves. So it's not only about being independent, being professional, stuff like that. There are, having working abroad for many, many years in Kimball recently and the Talent Corporation Initiative, there are times that even people on the board are not there. I wouldn't like to use certain statement that may evoke, different discussion, but the quality of the board members themselves need to be there. I think the reality is, what is the role of the board? It's about setting direction, it's about taking the company to the next level, let alone the corporate governance. But many cases, people are put on board for the years of service somewhere and stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying that people with long years of service are not relevant. But what I'm saying is that people that need to be on the board are people that really can take the company to the next level. People who have guts, people who have expertise, people who have qualification, they can really challenge the management, challenge the shareholders, whoever it takes. But in many cases, my own observation is around, even at the board level, you don't even have good dialogue. Whatever said by the chairman, it's done, yes, stuff like that. And unless we establish a selection criteria, in my view, it's just like any other situation, even like recruiting people into the companies. You don't get the people right from day one, then we have problems no matter what rules you put into the system. That's just kind of open comment. The other comment is, I'm not so sure that I agree with your comment whether 9 years or 5. That's something we can maybe talk over coffee.
Thank you for the comments. I'll come back to that. But can we just take that question? The comments are basically the quality of the board, and you did express your disagreement on the term. Well, the corporate governance 2012 has a term of 9 years for independent directors. Maybe we'll come back to that. Yes.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning. I'm Rizal from Pelawan Persaraan. I've got 2 quick questions. Perhaps the first question is for Tan Sri Dato' Dr. Lin. You mentioned that it takes 4 to 6 years for the independent director to familiarize with the company. So I would appreciate if you can share your knowledge on this, perhaps an academic argument that the longer you serve on the board, the more your independence is eroded. From your experience as an independent director, have you personally witnessed the independent directors being less independent the longer they serve? Maybe not to a large extent, but perhaps to a smaller extent. And number 2, this leads to the second question, maybe for Tan Sri, Dato' Sri Megat Najmuddin, whereby if we were to enforce this 9-year limit, will we not then run out of good independent directors? Because as it is now, it's not easy to find good independent directors. Thank you.
Okay, back to the topic. Tan Sri.
Thank you. As I said, I have been in the corporate sector for 20 years. I'm one of those who sit on 7 publicly listed companies in Malaysia, and 3 in Singapore, and 1 in Indonesia. My experience is that I sit on actually big boards, most of them, and the activities that are involved are enormous. Let me give you an example. I've been on the Ginting board for about 10 years now, right at the apex, Ginting Berhad. Besides the setting up of casinos all over the world and the shipping line, very few people know we are very big in oil and gas. We are very big in independent power. We own 4 independent power plants in India. We have 2 independent power plants in China. We own coal plants. To be a director, and I'm chairman of audit committee. Can you imagine? the amount of time I need to devote to understand all this. You know, I'm an economist, but I have to understand, for example, the exploration of oil and gas, right? They come to the board, have to be vetted by an audit committee. You're going to put in $450 million of wells. You don't learn that business in a year. You learn it over time. Similarly with independent power. Lots of problems come out. Things like that. For example, our power projects in India are run on gas, and all of a sudden there's no gas. In China, run on coal. It's a pass-through system. And all of a sudden the government says that you cannot pass on the increasing cost when coal prices went up. You have to understand not just the business, but the cultural and the political atmosphere in which your companies operate. So just one company is fully international. Then all of a sudden now, you just bought a casino in Las Vegas. In fact, I had to run to my office just now. I have to fill in a huge form because although I'm not directly involved, I sit on the apex that owns it. And so they have to license me as a hotel operator, as a casino operator. The forms I have to fill is this thing. The fingerprinting I have to do. The main thing is, it takes a long time to understand the business of big companies. The same thing happens when I set on Great Eastern Life. Can you imagine? Biggest life insurance company in Malaysia, Singapore, and ASEAN. Risk management. We spend lots and lots and lots of time on learning risk management, and that's highly technical. I've been doing audit for 16 years. I just retired from it, because it was taking too much of my time. So this is what I mean, that it takes a while, but more importantly, as I mentioned just now, most of these are family-owned companies. It takes you a long time to understand the agenda of the family in order to be able to operate and to have harmony within the group. It takes time.
A quick 1 minute, John.
A very quick one, because I have to answer the question from the two gentlemen just now. The first one is regarding the 9-year rule, whether it is mandatory or not, whether it's enforceable, it's going to be enforced as a piece of legislation or not. I don't think they can do that. At the moment, it's just best practice, actually. It's voluntary. Therefore, if you have a good reason to stay on more than 9 years, you can justify that in your annual report.
But you see, there's a difference between Malaysia and Singapore. In Singapore, they left it to the board to decide. But here, you have to go to AGM, which is very common. For example, let's say your 9-year rules come up 3 months after AGM. You got to wait 9 months to get reappointed. Does it make sense?
True, very true. We have to go through the AGM, but still, it's not the law. And regarding this tension between independent directors and professional directors, I think that's what you're coming to. And also the lack of training, or rather the lack of expertise on the part of certain independent directors. Well, as Tan Sri said, it takes time for this. I'm sure there are people of above average intelligence that are put, unless they are really idiots, then susah. I'm sure they are intelligent, you're doing very well. And I must say there must be something good in your corporate governance there. You're giving incredible dividends to your shareholders. Well done. So I think you've done well. So I'm sure that these directors that are maybe a bit ignorant of certain things, you can teach them, you can train them, send them for training, send them to come to training sessions like this, conferences, seminars. I'm sure in time they will get to to grasp all the niceties of banking, a la Bank Raya, of course. I mean, I am a director of Petronas. Imagine that. I mean, as a lawyer, no experience at all in oil and gas. Suddenly, I was made a director of Petronas. So it has been 2.5 years since, and it was a very steep learning curve for me because it's highly, highly risky. You talk about risk. My goodness, oil and gas is full of risk, but the rewards are fantastic. You can make billions, but you can also lose billions if you make the wrong move. Okay?
It's getting interesting. Actually, there was some requests from the floor as well, but I'm told that I need to. Can I take one more quick one? Do I have your permission? A quick comment because we're actually in injury time already.
Just a quick one.
So can you identify yourself?
Cam, I think Tan Sri Makat knows me since I was a little boy. He was only Anyway, just a quick comment from Tan Sri Makat also, and I think to the panel, where you talked about ongoing directors' education. But I think also what it boils down also to governance and self-regulation is whether it's nature or nurtured, whether it's in your DNA, but also I think very importantly is upbringing and education at a young age. I think if that's not there, no matter how you want to educate when the guy is 30 or 40, I think it's going to be a problem. I don't know, that's my comment.
Okay, just a very short retort on that. Because I think everything, as you rightly point out, I think it revolves around the question of integrity. I quote to you, okay, Arthur Levitt, the former chairman of the US Securities and Exchange Commission. He said, in this information-driven age, the director's responsibilities have become more complex, but the director's role rests on the old-fashioned value, integrity. Integrity of character, integrity of auditing and compliance system, and above all, integrity of mission. So this whole thing about self-regulation, about regulation, about governance, good governance, revolves around that word, integrity. We must have integrity everywhere. Thank you.
I would like to thank for the participation. Actually, I'm sure we could have gone up another half an hour, but as I'm standing between you and your networking session and your tea, I'd like to thank our economist, central banker turned casino operator, our corporate guy, and our airport operator for making this a lively and I'm sure a very informative session. And thank you for being such a nice group of participants. A hand of round of
Ladies and gentlemen.